Hey everyone, I'm Rick Beato. I have my dear friend Ward Carroll is in town visiting. Ward has a YouTube channel that you should definitely subscribe to. Ward, tell them about your channel.
So it's about military aviation. I spent a few years in the backseat of the F-14 as what we call a Tomcat RIA. Remember Top Gun Maverick and Goose? I was Goose, except for the hit your head on the canopy and die part. So it's about the stories of what I did when I was in the Navy, and it's about some history and some lists like what you do, and movie reviews about aviation movies and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's grown pretty fast over the last number of months, and we're having a lot of fun with it.
Ward is also a musician, and that's how Ward and I became friends through music. And our video today was sparked from a conversation that we had about a video I did recently where I was talking about perfect album. And so Ward and I came up with our list of 10 perfect albums. There's obviously more perfect albums, which I'm sure that you will put in the comments later on. But Ward is going to start it off. Ward, what are you going to start with?
So I'm going to start with an album that was actually also the first concert I ever saw. Okay. So 1972, I lived in Holland, and I went to Amsterdam and saw The Who touring in support of Who's Next. So Keith Moon was still alive. I was a huge Pete Townsend fan as a result of seeing the Woodstock album when I was all of 10 years old. And so this album, from beginning to end, is note perfect. There's not a wasted beat in that. It's some of Pete Townsend's most inspired composition work.
The production of the record by Glyn Johns is absolutely phenomenal, and I concur with him. It is a perfect album.
And my favorite song is not Won't Get Fooled Again or Baba O'Reilly. It's Bargain. For me, it's just definitive Pete Townsend.
So my first perfect album would be the Beatles' Revolver. Second psychedelic record by the Beatles, the first being Rubber Soul, which was done just before this, months before Revolver. It starts off, I believe, with Taxman, but you have the songs like
Here, There, and Everywhere,
She Said, She Said,
Got to Get You Into My Life, the horn section there, and the lead progression there, which I think Paul playing lead, not George.
I believe that's
Got
true.
to Get You Into My Life.
Yeah.
You know, it's years ahead of its time, really.
Yeah.
And I know it's sort of cliche to say that, but this is the Beatles turning a corner in terms of depth of both narrative and production and complexity of songs. This is definitely a perfect
then you
album.
have Tomorrow Never Knows,
Right, which is legendary in terms of psychedelia and the drum riff. You know, it was When the Levee Breaks before When the Levee Breaks in terms of the drum tone.
For me, a better record than Sgt. Pepper's. My own personal opinion on that, but this is, to me, a perfect record.
So my next perfect album is Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon.
Can't really argue with that.
No, and you know, I remember in high school, first time a friend of mine who was my cool friend like you are now, dropped the needle on that one, and we just listened to it end to end. Right, it's transcendent, starting with the heartbeat into that lush orchestration with Breathe and the way they segue into the next song with the sound of the helicopters. It just has such an import to it. Such a like, this album really matters. So lushly produced, great hooks, great vocals, the best of Gilmour and Waters before The Wall.
This is really an incredibly consistent record. It's interesting, though, you picked it, your first record was from 1971, right? But you talked about seeing them in 1972, and then this record's from 1973. What was going on in the 70s there, Ward?
Well, so this is the post-Beatles breakup entropy that was filling on the airwaves. Mm-hmm. Artists that were maybe living in the shadow of the Beatles before now are getting their due. There's more airtime available, making record deals and really creating in a way that maybe they weren't before. In the case of Pink Floyd, this is David Gilmour. The lead, particularly in the song Time, we talk about, as you have talked about in one of the episodes, Comfortably Numb in that lead. But this is the soaring lead on Time is kind of that before the Wall album. So he's really finding his voice. David Gilmour joined the band because Syd Barrett had to leave the band.
That's right.
And so that changed a lot, and it could have been the end of them, but it really was them shifting into the next gear, which is an interesting progression.
Okay, so my second album is Boston's first album. You guys know, obviously, More Than a Feeling, which begins the record, but virtually every song on that record was a single. Not only was the record sonically consistent from front to back, Tom Scholz actually created sounds that had never been heard before. The pick scrapes, all these kind of things, the lead tones, the different lead tones at the ending of Hitch a Ride, obviously More Than Feeling, the harmonies of Brad Delp, just nothing like anyone had ever heard before.
Exactly right. This is one of those albums that when you listen to it, you can't really listen to anything afterwards. It sounds thin after you listen to the Boston debut album. Along the same lines of the albums with gigantic sound would be Pearl Jam 10. Once you listen to it, if you listen to something else in the wake of that, it's going to sound a little bit thin to your ear. So this is one that I was introduced to by the bassist of a band called Drivin' and Cryin', and I happened to see them right before I went on deployment in an F-14 squadron, and they're like, you got to get this album 10, right? So this is the beginning of grunge when it's just about to break. I bought it and just would listen to it literally on repeat, the CD, and just end to end from the beginning of Once until the end, the last outro. It's just a fantastic assault.
This record was produced by Rick Parasher and mixed by Tim Palmer. And the guys in Pearl Jam didn't like the mix because of the reverb. They thought it had an 80s feel to it. And they had Brendan O'Brien remix it. But I would argue, even though I'm a massive Brendan O'Brien fan, that the remixes did not work.
It does not work for me.
Does not work.
No. And so also for me, in terms of Pearl Jam's follow-on efforts, I wish they'd done some of the follow-on albums the way that the first one was produced.
Even though their second record, Versus, is incredibly good sounding. Totally different, very dry.
Yeah, right. And so to my ear, it's too dry. And you listen to those songs live, because there is some reverb and more depth to them, they come alive live. I think they're compressed.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. But they're compressed, in the studio. To my ear. Again,
Okay.
I'm not going to quibble about whether Brendan O'Brien is a great producer or not, but I think all of their body work lives in the absolute shadow of 10. It's a fantastic album.
My next perfect album is Trick of the Tail by Genesis, which came out in 1976. Now, I did a What Makes a Song Great on the first song on the record, Dance on the Volcano, but the other songs, Entangled, Squonk, Madman Moon, Robbery, Salt and Battery, Ripples, oh my God, these songs are unbelievably great. If you do not know this record, you need to know it. It's the first record that Phil Collins sang lead on.
Well, I was very impressed when you did What Makes This Song Great with Dance on a Volcano.
Yep.
That was, a rare song to tackle, and I loved you dissecting that
The
one.
bar of 11:16, I think it was.
Where the time signatures are nutty. So this is Phil Collins moving from behind the kit to the front of the stage as Peter Gabriel left. So the band still had that sort of import. It didn't get poppy. They weren't doing Sussudio and these kinds of things as they did, or Invisible Touch. It got poppy as time went on. Some would say Phil Collins wrecked the band. I'm not going to go that far, but certainly this inflection point for Genesis, it's the best of the tenor that the seriousness of Peter Gabriel brought, and the orchestration and the magisterial part of what they did, the highs and the lows. The reason people love Genesis for those long songs and dreamy passages and ethereal things, all of that's Entangled for sure. But for me, the definitive song on this album is Madman Moon. That's Tony Banks' signature riff, gorgeous vocals by Phil Collins. Seriously, this is the song I want played at my funeral.
Okay.
I'm not kidding. That's a gorgeous song.
To me, the definitive song is Ripples. We'll argue a little bit about that, but that song is one of Phil Collins' finest vocals, and it has just the most beautiful melody on it.
I think that's
Entangled.
I'm not
too?
going to die on that hill.
Right.
I love Ripples. I especially love when it goes into the drum riff at the very end, and the chorus when the drums come in is just transcendent, right?
Yeah.
And the 12 strings banging away. It is perfect mid-career Genesis. I agree. So my next perfect album is Court and Spark by your good friend Joni Mitchell. From that,
I wouldn't go that far as saying my good friend. I love Joni Mitchell, and I had dinner with her one time, and she's
see, that qualifies in the business.
Okay.
It's called good friends, right?
I love Joni.
So,
the best.
So of her entire body of work, which is amazing, and I don't think she gets enough credit for what she does with alternate tunings and orchestrations, and
although she does on my channel.
On your channel she does, but I think in general she was thought of as a folk artist and sort of left at that level. But Court and Spark is, I think, her most accessible album, for one thing. But that label undersells the complexity of both the composition and the production. For instance, People's Parties, the alternate tunings in that is an incredible song. And the way the album starts, just with that really mournful piano, and then sort of her voice comes in, and then by the time you get to the second song, which is Help Me, you're on board for this incredible tour de force.
So when I had dinner with Joni, I didn't say this in my video about it, but I asked Joni what she thought her best record was, songwriting and production, meaning what was the album that actually realized her vision the most, right? Where she thought she had the best songs and the best production of it. And she said Court and Spark, with Hijiro being the second one. But Court and Spark was the first thing she said. It was the first record she did with Tom Scott and the LA Express. It was really her first foray into using jazz musicians.
Well, I love hearing that, because that's the way I feel. And I think if you had to pick her best song ever, and this is a tough thing to call, I would say Help Me. The harmonies at the outset and the way that one's constructed is just amazing at every level.
Yeah. My next perfect album is U2 Achtung Baby, which was released in November of 1991. So once again, 30 years ago. Now the record actually started out, the first single was The Fly. And I remember hearing that, even though it's not the first song on the record, Zoo Station is, but when I heard that and saw the video on MTV, I thought, wow, this is a departure. Sonically, the grooves that were on this record, I mean, everything about this record, the darkness of it. You had the song One, which is one of their best songs they ever had, Who's Gonna Ride Your Wild Horses, Acrobat, Love is Blindness. These are absolutely phenomenal songs. It was produced by Daniel Lanois and Brian Eno, just like Joshua Tree was. I could have said Joshua Tree is a perfect album, because it is. But to me, this album was a foreshadowing of a lot of the music that was to come out of Europe later in the 90s. I saw them play at Veterans Stadium in 1992 on this tour, and it was interesting to see the juxtaposition between the Joshua Tree songs and the new songs and how different they were. And it was really an incredible, it's one of the best concerts I've ever seen.
So I would have picked Joshua Tree, but I fully respect what you're talking about here with respect to Achtung Baby. The courage that U2 has always shown to not rest on their laurels is very Beatlesque. Always pushing forward, always what's next, how do we as artists push out the boundaries here? Not quite fans be damned, because they always made smart decisions with respect to the choices they made.
Except for putting their record on the iPhone.
Well, okay, that was a bad decision. Right? That was too cute by half, as we say in the fighter business. But yes, I agree. Achtung Baby did both break ground in its own right and set the stage for what was going to come for years after that. So my next one is Fleetwood Mac Rumours.
No arguments
This
there.
album came out when I was a junior in high school. I remember was at a party at a remote location, and somebody had it on 8-track and in their Camaro and was blasting it either right before or right after somebody else played Toys in the Attic. But you hear that.
Another perfect album.
That's a good one too.
Yeah.
Could have made our list. But you hear the chain and just that.
The pulse of that.
And the riff into the build and the voices, the harmonies, Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, and she's of her best voice.
Yeah.
And then when you learned the backstory of all the strife within the band.
Go Your Own Way.
Yes, but it just sort of underwrites the importance of the lyrics, and it's the intensity part. Like, where did that come from? It's that strife. All good art is born of strife. So this album, you drop the needle, and every song is fantastic until the very end. Just
one thing that this album, as in every record we've talked about, is it's incredibly well recorded and mixed. It has a really consistent sound front to back. Withstands the test of time too. It sounds just as good as it did when it came out.
The other standout song for me besides The Chain is Gold Dust Woman. The hits are great and fantastic and stand up, but those songs just sort of jump out as having this intensity about them that is definitive in terms of Fleetwood Mac to me.
My last album is Back in Black. came out when I was a freshman in college, 1980. The first song on the record, Hell's Bells. I mean, how do you start a record with a ballad and have it be that heavy? Shoot to Thrill, What You Do for Money Honey, Giving the Dog a Bone, Let Me Put My Love in You, Back in Black, You Should Be All Night Long. Not only is this a dark return of AC/DC after the death of Bon Scott, probably 6 months before. I mean, it was a very short period of time during the transition from Highway to Hell into Back in Black. Most people, I was a huge AC/DC fan before this, thought, oh, that's the end of the band. And then to come back with Back in Black was unbelievable.
So I agree with you. I was a huge fan before as well. I think If You Want Blood, You Got It stands up as one of the greatest live albums of all times. Highway to Hell is a fantastic album. I got it the day it came out. There was a record store in downtown Annapolis that isn't there anymore. But was a huge fan with Bon Scott. And like you, I'm like, so what do they do now when you got word that he had passed away? I remember the first time I heard this album, I was in Hawaii. I had just gotten off a Navy ship. I was a rising senior at the Naval Academy. A friend of mine had the first ever Walkman, and he had a cassette of Back in Black. And I put it on and pushed play, and it was queued up to Shoot to Thrill. I just remember walking through the hallways of the bachelor's officers' quarters where we were staying there, overlooking the beach at Kaneohe, and listening to that. It was just sounded so incredible, right? Mutt Lange's production, Brian Johnson's voice is great. Obviously Angus and Malcolm are just kicking ass throughout. It is a perfect album.
When I was a freshman, my roommate at the time, I remember one night came in at 3 a.m. and decided to put the record, his stereo, he had a massive stereo in our dorm room, put it on 10 and dropped it on Back in Black right in the middle and started a fight. People jumped out of the rooms and he was fist fight with people, and I just jumped out of bed. I mean, it was insane. And then all this fighting going on out in the hall. It was a great, great time.
So have you seen AC/DC live?
I did. I saw him. Last time I saw AC/DC live was in 1991, actually.
So I saw them with Axl Rose as the front man in 2015. I just went to see Angus. Mm-hmm. Malcolm was no longer touring with them at this time. His cousin or whoever, the guy that stands in for them, their brother, was playing Malcolm's role. But when you hear these songs from this album live, it's almost like I was almost moved to tears, because they're so much a part of our lives and just such great songs that are timeless. So yes, this is a perfect album.
No one would argue with that either.
No one rational would argue with that. Certainly somebody out there can argue with that, but no one rational would argue with that.
Okay, so that's our list. Put it in the comments what you guys think we missed or albums that you think are perfect albums. There are many other ones. There will probably be more videos in this series. I'm going to make specific videos on specific records that I think are perfect records. Remember to follow Ward Carroll on his channel. You will not be disappointed. It's one of my favorite YouTube channels, and Ward is my protege.
I am. I'd be nothing on YouTube without Rick, and that's not
true.
But
that's not true.
It's great to see you, my friend.
Thanks, Ward. That's all for now. Don't forget to subscribe, ring the bell, and leave a comment. Check out my new Quick Lessons Pro guitar course that just came out. Also, the Beato book, if you want to learn about music theory, that's how you do it. And check out my Beato ear training course at beatoeartraining.com. And don't forget, if you want to support the channel even more, think about becoming a member of the Beato Club. Thanks so much for watching.